By 2030, it's estimated that 375 million workers globally, which is approximately 14% of the workforce, will need to switch occupational categories due to automation and AI advancements, according to a report by McKinsey. However, another Deloitte report suggests that only 24% of employees feel like they are learning at the speed needed to keep up with future job requirements. The clock is ticking, and indeed, the gap is massive. Hello, everyone. My name is Rajiv Jayaraman. I'm the founder CEO of KNOLSKAPE, and I welcome all of you to another episode of the Learning Curve powered by KNOLSKAPE. And today, to share his thoughts on the evolution of L&D domain and to discuss some of the paradoxes that exist in the space, I have someone who has built an enormous global community for L&D with his expertise and unparalleled vision and thought leadership. Edmund Monk, CEO and co-founder of the Learning and Performance Institute, the global body for learning professionals, also known as the LPI. Respected internationally as an authority on workplace learning, he advises some of the largest companies in the world on their workplace learning strategies and governments on their approach to skills. Edmund has delivered keynotes worldwide on topics such as humanification of digital learning, human-centered facilitation, the future of learning, and the convenience and efficiency paradox. He's also responsible for the Learning Awards, Learning Live, and the Learning and Performance Accelerator. Hi, Ed. It's a privilege and a pleasure to have you on this podcast. Welcome to the Learning Curve.
Thank you so much. What an incredible introduction. I feel that tingly feeling, reminding myself of all those things that we've achieved over the years, and obviously with a great team behind me. But it's a privilege to talk to you, Rajiv. Congratulations as well on everything you've done with a wonderful organization.
Thank you so much. Before we move to our discussion, I have a quick rapid fire for you. Are you ready?
Of course, yeah, let's go.
If not L&D, which field would you have chosen?
That's a great question. I mean, I would love to think that I would have been a rhythm guitarist in a band if you'd asked me when I was 18, but perhaps sports coaching.
Oh wow, that's fantastic. I've seen a video of yours on YouTube and I noticed the guitar in the background. I wanted to have a conversation with you about that. So it's great. The most exciting trend in workplace learning right now.
My most exciting friend in workplace learning, I'm going to pick two. I work really closely with Dr. Ashwin Mehta, who's the ex-Chief Learning Officer of Bayer, and he's the new Chief AI Strategist at the LPI. And the conversations that I have with him they blow my mind every single time. There's so much to learn there, such new opportunities, and he really is at the cutting edge. One of the things that he's great at is demystification. And I will talk today, I'm sure, about AI. It always seems to come up, but he's fantastic at demystifying those concepts for the general public. And I really admire that. I think that's a great skill. The other would be Frank Fernari, who's the CEO founder of RUVR, Augmented Reality and Virtual Reality Organization. And again, just really inspiring, cutting edge, maybe 2 or 3 years ahead of where the world is learning at the moment. But they will be very successful.
Awesome. I love that. A skill that you wish to learn in 2025?
I would like to be, not necessarily, yeah, I suppose it's a skill. I would like to be able to play paddle a lot better than I can at the moment.
Okay.
I'm not particularly good at it. It's a new sport that I'm trying, but I really like it. And it's important that I keep fit. As I mentioned before we started this, I've just turned 50, so I need to keep fit.
Awesome, awesome. And do you try to apply all that you know about learning and learning strategies when you pick up something like that?
Yeah, anybody who knows me really well, my friends will tell you that I can't do anything less than 100%. So whether it's, coaching 8-year-old kids playing football or running a global institute, I can't, not give 100%. I have to give everything. So, expect me to be playing paddle in the Olympics for the United Kingdom at some point.
Wow, I love that. I love that.
I wish.
One thing, yeah, interestingly, I'm a late bloomer when it comes to calisthenics and acrobatics. I picked it up very late in life as of last year. And I keep telling myself, so I'm going to be participating in the Senior Olympics, and so that's the grand vision I have, right? Although my friends, think it's a joke. For me, it's real, right? I don't know if it's going to happen. It doesn't matter, but that's a big, hairy, audacious goal that I have in my mind.
I love it. The question I would always say is, if not you, who else?
Who else, right? Love that. One thing people might be surprised to learn about you.
Languages are the thing I was most curious about when I was younger. So I'll say two things. I love languages. I'm so curious to try and learn more about language. And my lower left leg is reconstructed with metal after a horrific sport injury in my mid
Wow.
20s. So yeah, if you ever have to identify me, just make the point that his left leg is metal, and then people will know that you know me.
All right. And one place you love to visit for inspiration.
I'm lucky enough to have a beach house on the North Wales coast in Anglesey, and you walk out of the building and you're straight onto the beach with the kind of rocky landscape. It's beautiful and it's very inspiring. And I've always found that my life can be quite paradoxical in that I really like the hustle and bustle of growing an organization, traveling around the world, but I also really need calm. And that's where
Right,
the creativity happens. When I have that
right.
calm, that's the place I go to.
Awesome. Love that. And that was a wonderful rapid fire. Thank you so much, Ed, for being a sport. And we shall now move to the detailed discussion. And I have a few questions lined up for you. Ed, I'm personally very curious to know about the vision you had for transforming global L&D landscape when you co-founded LPI. How did that vision come about and how has it evolved over time?
Prior to launching the LPI with a couple of colleagues, I was in publishing and we had as the advertisers in that magazine a lot of organizations who were selling their training services. We started to feel that we were promoting less moral organizations. So a big organization came along and bought the magazine, which was great. And with that money, the institute was created. The principles at the beginning were, we felt that L&D was pretty stale. If I'm going to be direct today with you, Rajiv, L&D mid-90s, very stale, very uninspiring, not
Yeah.
driven by efficacy, seen as the poor relation. Um, People who became L&D professionals fell into that profession because they were
Mm.
subject matter experts. So it wasn't really seen as a profession. It was seen as something that you ended up doing towards the end
Mm.
of your career when you were an expert in something. And it's changed a lot over the years. CBT, e-learning, blended learning, all of these terms. And we love terminology in L&D, don't we? We love to
Right.
have a brand name. And we just felt at the time that it needed professionalizing and we could raise the profile of the profession with one explicit statement from day one, really. It was about making learning work, a
Yeah.
results a results orientated profession that was respected by employers. So rather than when CEOs sit around and look at their budgets, offering L&D a little bit at the end, actually we wanted L&D to be front and center. And I
Right.
and I wanted to create a community for learning professionals where they can engage with each other. That was the other point. So, bringing people together so that they could learn collaboratively. The final point I would make is I don't think really that L&D people, when we launched the Institute, were concerned about the performance of the organization in terms of thinking they could add to that. They were providing training. And the
Mm.
metric that was used to measure their success was how many people have gone through your training courses this year. This is a long time ago. It's not like this anymore. But I remember having really long conversations, Rajiv, about whether we wanted the P in LPI to be in there. Do we need
Right.
performance in there? And some people were disagreeing. It's one of the best things we've ever done. I'm really proud of the fact that the team said, no, let's go with it because performance is the outcome, and L&D teams are not a cost center. they should drive the performance of companies and individuals. So that's how we started. That's how it's evolved. And the vision remains the same, that we want to make learning work, but now it's obviously much more complex and holistic, and there's so many elements to it. When we started the Institute, 90% of the members were trainers.
Yeah.
Now you have prompt engineers, performance consultants. It's probably about 80 different roles.
Awesome. I love that. And I heard you talk about sports coaching earlier,
Hmm.
right? Something that's very intuitively understood in sports, that coaching and learning outside of the field is very important. That's what drives performance. But somehow when it comes to the corporate environment, that connection is not really well understood or appreciated. Why do you think that is the case?
Why do I think that coaching and mentoring isn't really appreciated?
Learning, coaching, mentoring, while well understood in the area of sports, for example, and everybody sees the impact of that.
Mm.
But somehow when it comes to the corporate environment, we don't see the connection that well.
One of the things that I'm very lucky to have, Rajiv, is the LPI is a data house, one of the largest in the world. So if I have my opinion on questions like this, but I can also give you what the data tells us. So the biggest obstacle for people learning at work is time.
Yeah,
They actually do want to evolve. They do. Jet
yeah,
people as a race, as a human race, of course, we always want to evolve. It's why we exist on this planet.
yeah,
So, but there's a counter to that, which is this principle of homeostasis, making things easier for ourselves. I'm sure we'll probably come on to that. So you have the individual challenge, which is, but I don't have enough time in the day to do this, which is obviously ironic, because if they did have, the organizations would perform better, and so would they. They'd probably also stay within the business. But
right.
also organizationally, the time problem is actually leadership's fault. So if I go back to what I just said, employees want to learn, and therefore they want to have the time to learn, but they're not given the permission to do that.
Yeah,
So leadership has to give them the freedom to do that. And if you go back to the Project Archimedes or Project Aristotle, forgive me, I forget which name it was, but the project done by Google as to what creates an effective team. Psychological safety is the number
yeah,
one factor behind successful teams. Well, if the leadership within an organization is not providing employees with the room to learn and the time to learn, you've got a very difficult environment then. The culture isn't right. And I'll give you one other data point. The top challenge for chief learning officers and heads of learning is, how do we infuse generative AI? But interestingly, if you just drop below that top challenge and look at number 2, the biggest challenge they have is fostering or engendering a learning culture.
right.
And the biggest mistake people are making at the moment is not considering that second one.
Yeah,
So you and I, I'm sure if we were sat together and sharing a coffee or tea or whatever, we could both list organizations that we know that have spent thousands on learning experience platforms and had no employee engagement.
right,
So they'll spend the money on the tech, but they won't spend the money on empowering people to use that. And
right.
that's the mistake we're making at the moment. So yeah, people do want to learn. Yes, I think they want it to be made as easy as possible. Do I think they're given the time to do that? No.
All right, all right. So that's so insightful. Thanks, Ed, for sharing that. As someone who advises both global corporations and governments, what common challenges do you see in futurizing the workplace learning strategies across these sectors? So we talk about AI, and you alluded to this as well, how excited you are about advancements. What common challenges do you see in companies or governments when they think about AI and futurizing the workplace?
Clearly, the main difference between global corporations and governments is budget.
Yeah,
So I do work with the top 10 largest companies in the world, and in some cases sit on their advisory boards for their learning strategies. And they're not short of money to spend on modernizing learning within their organization, whereas governments are. and
Yeah.
trying to provoke learning culture as a state is incredibly difficult. So
Yeah.
the common, whilst there's differences within budget, there are common challenges in what is perceived as possible as well. So the willingness, if you like, to adopt new ways, new approaches. I'll give you another example, actually. For many years in the UK, the internet was banned in certain government functions.
Right.
Now, if I say that to somebody, Gen Z, they can't believe it. And they think I'm, from 300 years ago or something. But I'm talking about 20 years ago.
Right.
And these are government functions, really important ones, actually, which I won't mention to not embarrass them. But the idea that you're, banning the internet is just laughable these days because it's accessible all the time,
Yeah.
anywhere, right? So you have that as an issue. There's a lot of archaic processes still within public sector, widespread use of fax machines still. Trust me, that's absolutely true. I'm not exaggerating. But I think speed of adoption as well is that's a perennial issue for public sector. So you have all sorts of bureaucracy within public sector that doesn't exist within the private sector. It is improving. I will say that because we live in such a fast changing world and we all have to keep up as best we can. But there are some incredibly exciting things happening in the largest companies in the world that I hope will permeate governments and statewide principles and policy in terms of learning. In the academic sector, there's a sort of philosophical argument around how we should be helping students to learn pre-18. And that's entirely different because there's a duty of care to children, social training as well, bringing them up as people, being responsible for them during the day. But when we're talking about workplace learning for adults, then it's probably the most exciting point in my lifetime in terms of what opportunities there are, regardless of which sector you work in. It's more about how much you're prepared to experiment.
Awesome. I love that. I love that. I can clearly sense the enthusiasm you have around AI and digital tools. Just building on that, you've been a big proponent of transformative power of digital tools in learning. However, there are growing concerns around AI's ethical implications, such as bias, transparency, and privacy, and so on. In that context, how do you see organizations dealing with the adoption of AI in learning? And ensuring that they navigate the ethical complexities as well. And if you can throw in something about psychological safety, because that's a word that you used earlier, from all the conversations I've had, tools are there. But when you launch that, how does the employee feel about that, right? So, I was talking to the chief digital officer of a large global beverage brand. They've launched a mobile app which has got AI capabilities in it. It's easy enough to push this out to everybody today, but then the employee is thinking, I can see that the AI is doing some great work on my mobile device. What else is it doing? What other
Yeah,
information is it reading, right? And what does it mean for me? Because today people know that AI can learn whatever it is that I'm doing, absorb all of that, and become super intelligent. So can you speak about these issues that are coming up in terms of ethical implications, biases, transparency, and also this element of psychological safety?
yeah, of course. Oh, so let's separate the two then. If you look at the adoption of AI in learning and then maybe come on to the
Right.
sort of ethical complexities, right? Let's be really clear here, Rajiv. This is not going away.
Yeah.
To be really clear. In
Right.
2016, Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, and others, however moral or immoral we may think some of these people might be at some point, a letter was sent to the United Nations saying that if you don't do something about it, AI will become unstoppable. They then wrote a letter 6 months later saying it's too late. So
Right.
we have to learn to live with it. It's not going away. We're not going to turn off the internet worldwide. So let's just accept that we have to learn to live with this. If we
Yeah.
look at the adoption piece, first of all, the positives are that there's unprecedented, amazing amounts of potential to transform learning experiences here. So personalization like never before, learning content literally tailored to the individual needs of a student, and by that I mean employee. That will obviously enhance engagement and improve processes across the company. For educators or learning professionals, or whatever we want to call them, that can offer more adaptive learning pathways, if you like.
Right.
So it allows students to progress at their own pace, which we haven't been able to do before. It's been at the dictated pace of the learning professional. But it also at the same time means that the content is more relevant and more effective. The caveat I want to offer to that is it's crucial, though, that we approach AI adoption progressively, thoughtfully and progressively, which is where you're talking about the ethical side of it. So it can complement the traditional teaching methods that we have rather than replace them entirely. It can replace a lot, but not entirely. It can support learning professionals. It can automate administrative tasks like grading. It can give you insights into student performance like never before, which means we've got more time for the coaching and mentoring and teaching that you were talking about earlier. If we're all passionate about this, then why isn't it happening yet? So I've seen AI integrated into education through tools like intelligent tutoring systems, automated grading, that kind of thing. That if we're allowing instructors, facilitators, whatever you want to call them, to focus on what really matters, so guiding students through complex concepts, empowering them to think critically, being more creative, that's got to be a good thing, right? But then you have the challenge of, ethically though, where do we stand on this? And I'm so fortunate to work with some leading thinkers in this space. And in fact, in June, we've probably, by the time this podcast comes out, we will have announced it, but right now it's not even announced, so I can give you a world first. We're partnering with Microsoft to run an event called AI Learning Live, and it will be free for people responsible for AI learning strategies in their business. So we work really closely with the leading organizations, OpenAI, Microsoft, Google. They're all firmly embedded in what we're trying to do to help the profession. But it's really important that we collectively address the kind of ethical concerns that will naturally arise when something like this comes into our lives. So transparency, privacy, they're legitimate concerns, especially you're talking about examples there when we think about how AI algorithms might unintentionally perpetuate bias.
Yeah.
Then that's a concern. So one concern is how it can perpetuate bias. It can compromise privacy for us as well. So quite rightly, you were saying, well, my students might be thinking, well, where's my data going when I do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
What are they doing with that data? And you can see it, if you use generative AI tools as frequently as I do or my team do, every day it's getting more and more intelligent. It's now using my name back. It's talking about my role. It knows me actually.
Yeah.
So, and that can create a lack of clarity in decision-making processes. So what can we practically do? So that's the background, but what can we practically do to address this? Got to ensure that the AI systems that we're using are developed with firmly developed with strong ethical guidelines and principles, right? So they need to be transparent. They need to be explainable. Stakeholders need to understand how decisions are made. So no hidden use of this, taking away the authenticity of leadership.
Right.
Regular audits of the AI systems. That's really important. That helps identify and potentially address biases that might arise, and try and avoid advertently influencing outcomes in lots of different ways. Privacy is probably the most paramount issue, I think, that people are concerned about. That's what I'm hearing from advisory boards, but also from students and learners. We've got to protect students' personal data. So GDPR, the EU AI Act is coming into place. It's in one continent. which is, the start of regulation. So we can choose AI tools that guarantee data security. But also, this is a really hot topic for me, and I'm glad that it's starting to be talked about. We've got to ensure that AI development is inclusive.
Yeah.
I've not lived in a global society that is as polarized as it is now, ever before.
Yeah.
And it worries me. Anybody that has children worries about the future for them. So AI development needs to be inclusive. So diverse teams need to be involved in the creation of these things. So the famous stories about asking for generative, I won't name the tool, but generative AI tools to generate an image of a boardroom. And it shows 25 white middle-aged men on there.
Right.
And why is it doing that? Because it's scraping the whole internet for data, and that is what the majority of boardrooms look like. Well, that's horrific. Is that what we want to be, pushing out there? So inclusivity will be something that I think this year you'll hear a lot of people talk about when they talk about AI. So basically, there's a lot of promise in AI. There's a lot of talk about how it can transform learning. I agree. I think we must remain vigilant in how we implement it. That's all. Ensure that those ethical considerations are in place. Weave them, make them permeate every stage of AI development and application. That's what I think.
Awesome. Just to share a little bit about my research on this topic, right? Back in the day, 2019, I published a book called Clearing the Digital Blur, and that was about digital transformation and what's happening in the world around. I cringe a little bit when I look at the book right now. There are hardly 10 mentions of the word AI. And in the last, those were simple times in comparison. And last 5 years, we've seen this whole area explode. And now we're working on a concept of clearing the AI blur. So blur is an acronym. There are four dimensions I talk about. One is boundaryless data, right? How, today it's a junk in, junk out when it comes to AI, right? So how do you ensure the quality of data is right up there? The second one is the learning models. Now there are frontier models or foundational models as we know them today, but there are small language models as well, domain specific stuff. So how do you pick the right one that's best suited for your context? So that's all the stuff that leaders need to know these things. And then you and Blur is unlocking value. So it's one thing to make an investment in data and have these tools in place, but to unlock value from it, that's a culture question. That's a decision-making question, right? Not so much about the technology. And R is responsible AI, right? That's where all of these elements around, transparency and biases and all of those come in, right? So I think what you mentioned about AI adoption and being responsible about it, right? It's for sure very exciting, one of the most exciting things happening out there, but needs to have proper guardrails around it as well. So I really love the framing that you had.
Well, I think we are in violent agreement, as they say, Rajiv. I applaud you for the model. I was scribbling it down. I think the learning model piece, we'll see probably a lot of work on that this year with agents coming
Yeah.
out. You'll be aware of Agent Force. So we'll see a more prolific use of agents. And I think your unlocking value piece is obviously what we're seeing data-wise. So very astute of you 5 years, 6 years in advance to see that, because that's the second biggest challenge I spoke about earlier, the culture piece. So AI is not just a technological issue.
Right.
The tech is the vehicle. This is a cultural issue for everyone.
Yes.
And it's going to affect society in a way that we haven't seen before. Arguably, maybe the internet has democratized education at that point just as much. But where we use information, what we determine is knowledge and wisdom, what it means for memory. It's all up for grabs now, really. With a lot of contentious opinion. I've used the example before that my son, when he was a lot younger, came home from school and I asked him what he was working on, and he said the Czech Republic. So I asked him what the capital of the Czech Republic was, and he got out his phone and said, I know this, and said Prague. And genuinely, Rajiv, he felt that by accessing it, it was just as good as knowing it. It was the same. But to me, the generation, above, I thought that was absolutely ridiculous. And it changed my whole view of what we're doing with information. This was 2 years before ChatGPT came out, where we now have immediate access to complex answers
Right.
like never before, and the capacity to develop things, to even write code like
Yeah.
never before. We don't have to be coding experts. So
Yeah.
that democratization of expertise obviously brings with it concern, because not everybody on this planet, unfortunately, is moral.
Yeah. That's so true. The intention behind the use of AI, that's where the responsible AI really comes in, right? Great. I love that. You've often spoken about convenience efficacy paradox in learning. Can you elaborate on this?
Yeah, it's something I'm really passionate about, actually. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. We mentioned it a little bit earlier, but we live in a society that is driven by convenience. There's no getting away from it. So how we shop, how we travel, how we consume any kind of media is the argument is the more convenient, the better. So even if you look at just buying groceries, originally it was a walk to a grocer's, a butcher's, a baker's. Then it was a corner shop, a convenience store, actually,
Yeah. Right.
often called. Then there was the supermarket that had so many more things in there. Then there's a hypermarket. Actually, I can get everything I need from here. Then it's online. Then it's I can get it delivered. If it's something like Tesco in the UK, it's whoosh, and 5 minutes later, it's here.
Yeah.
So there is no argument against us being driven by convenience as a society. It's just a fact. And making things easier for ourselves is good. It's a normal human principle. I referred to it earlier called homeostasis. We're
Yeah.
driven by the desire to make things easier for ourselves. And that's fine. But in learning, it brings with it a lot of problems because we lose our focus on efficacy, on impact, demonstrable
Yeah.
impact specifically. In fact, it's more than dangerous, it's disastrous for learning
Yeah.
because learning then becomes bland. So if everybody just put through generative AI tools, build me a learning plan for this, you'll get a very basic level of plan with no disruptive element to it.
Yeah.
So I worry about this. I mean, it genuinely keeps me awake at night that we are, as a profession, not looking at the right areas. We're trying to find ways to just make things so much easier. One of the biggest mistakes heads of learning have made over the last 20 years is to buy these expensive content platforms, as I said earlier, with no intention to make it work, no employee
Right.
engagement piece, not thinking about the people, just thinking this is the largest content library in the world. Let's get that, put it on our intranet, and that's our learning strategy for this year. So many times, Rajiv, the LPI has been brought in to some of the biggest companies in the world, not exclusively, but you would be amazed at the names of these companies in terms of what they were doing this as well. In that they've done that, and then they bring the LPI in to say, how do we create employee engagement? People aren't using it. Well, they're not going to use it. They're not going to.
Yeah.
There's nothing engaging. It's a content library. Where's the meaningful learning experience? And I think that's where we've lost our way a little bit. Where if you look at it as like a dial on the spectrum of convenience to efficacy, we're just going that way all the time. The easier the access, the better. We've made it easier for you to learn. That's not the sole focus. So we talked about organizations providing their employees with time to do that. The second part of the challenge is to make that experience meaningful so that they do engage with it. How many e-learning courses have not been completed in the world since e-learning became so prevalent? I bet it's the vast majority. So it's a challenge for those of us who work in learning and development. But what I will say, which is a really odd data point, unexpected data point that we discovered this year, classroom-based training is on the rise.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And only this year it started. And if I give you a more social sort of fun data point, and I love this, I was reading about this the other day. I thought this was absolutely fantastic. The prediction when digital reading tools came out, Kindles and those kind of things, was that books will die off. And then as the internet developed and then AI tools came on board, the idea that people would even read books became almost laughable. You know, we might do the précis, the abridged versions, the abstracts, but they're not going to read books anymore. Well, actually, in fact, they might be on social networks, just scrolling through. That was the argument. Actually, one of the most popular hashtags on TikTok was book talk, where
Wow.
teenagers reviewed books,
Yeah.
and it resulted in exponential growth of sales of books. So we've now seen the curve decline in book sales and start to go back up again. And that is mirrored exactly in terms of the gradient of the curve by classroom-based training. Isn't that interesting? That
Yeah,
in
it is.
society, our consumption of books is mirrored by workplace learning. And
Awesome. I love
I
that.
love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you use the example of the convenience store. The other day, I was watching this documentary on Netflix called Buy Now, and it talks about how this whole element of friction has been removed from the buying process, right? Earlier, you had to get into your car and drive to a place and stand in a queue and buy it. And so you use certain filters. Is it really worth it? Right?
Mm,
And so there was a filtration mechanism. So you bought things that were absolutely essential. Now, sitting in your couch, you are able to order anything, and in a few minutes, it arrives at your doorstep. That has removed the friction in the process. And yes, convenience has gone up. But when you look at the system at large, we're creating enormous amounts of wastage, right? The landfills and all of that.
hmm
And so it was eye-opening for me to think about the system level impact of that convenience, right?
mm.
And you're here referring to how companies are buying these content libraries, and we are creating landfills as well in a different context, right? So yeah, it totally resonates with me. How do you create? And in fact, when you reflect on the biggest learnings that you would have had in your life, I'm sure when you had that mid-20s injury in your left foot, or was it the right foot? Left foot, I guess.
Left. Yeah,
The
yeah.
left one. I'm sure you learned quite a lot through that experience, and you found endurance, you found grit. There are certain things that you can't learn by doing an online course, things that you have to experience, right? So experiential learning counts for a lot, and I do believe that just by giving people that convenience access to content, we believe that the needle is going to shift. Unfortunately, that's now not how leaders build their repository of skills. That's not how anything serious gets built. So I completely resonate with what you're saying.
Yeah.
So,
They say, Raji, that necessity is the mother of invention,
right,
don't they? And
yeah,
you're right. Yeah, when I injured my leg, it was a pivotal point in my life, actually. I had a plaster cast for 10 months, I had a walking stick for nearly a year. It was a really
yeah,
serious injury. But it gave me an amazing perspective on life, actually.
yeah,
I'm not suggesting that we should injure people so that they understand the priorities in life, but I think there's less adversity for a lot of people now. I mean, we created a society with less adversity in it for a lot of people. I'm not saying everyone. There's widespread poverty in the world, on a wider perspective, which is
yeah,
horrific. And the gap between the very rich and the very poor is wider than ever before. But just generally speaking, for those of us that are working every day, in offices, that kind of lifestyle, everything is everything is made easier for us. And I actually think that remote working is, again, it's a convenient solution. This is fantastic post-pandemic. We don't have to go anywhere. Save money on expenses. Don't need to pay for petrol in my car. But then you see people visibly, sort of psychologically disintegrating
right,
that
right,
that you work with and thinking they don't seem motivated, or they seem down and exhausted, but in a bad way at the end of the day, they haven't got out. So
yeah.
balancing what's good for us and what's impactful on us as human beings and organizations with what's convenient is, I think, the one of the biggest challenges that the world faces at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely agree with you on that. And you emphasize the importance of human-centered facilitation in L&D in several of your keynotes. What role do you think leaders can play in humanizing not just the L&D process, but also the workplace culture that balances innovation with psychological safety? I think we touched upon this earlier, Now there is a school of thought which says, go fast and break everything that you can. That's innovation,
Mm,
right? At the same time, we are seeing the correlation between digitization and this AI and this whole movement, and there's definite correlation that research studies are showing with mental health issues. The sense of well-being in general is declining
mm.
worldwide, right? So what role do leaders play in getting this balance right?
It's it. I've always been an advocate for human-centered facilitation. I can't see a point where that will change. Um, I was partly responsible for the creation of one of the most successful human-centered facilitation programs for the world's largest public company. So I, to say I'm an advocate is probably an understatement. And it's clear that leaders obviously play a crucial role in that process, not just because they make L&D more personal, but they help to shape a workplace culture that values innovation and what we're referring to here as psychological safety. So, I mean, it's critically important. I think, I mean, if we break it down, so leaders have to recognize that the workplace isn't isn't just a hub for productivity. It's a community where people are encouraged to grow, where they're encouraged to learn, where they thrive. And L&D has to play a role of creating an environment where employees feel empowered to develop their skills. So we're back to that culture piece again that
Yeah,
you mentioned in unlocking value and we mentioned in our data sets. So if we can engender this climate of creativity, this curiosity, um, desire to continuously develop, where we have our employees feeling comfortable about taking risks and embracing new ideas, new challenges without this fear of failure, then that's got to
right.
be a good thing, right? But there are important elements to this that often aren't considered. So that all sounds great, doesn't it? And we can philosophize and go, this sounds wonderfully utopian, Ed. But the key to balancing innovation and psychological safety is ensuring that employees feel safe to express themselves. So they've got to be able to challenge the status quo. I say this a lot running my company, they laugh every time I say it, that I'm really happy for you to disagree with me. I want you to disagree with me. You're better at me at this topic than I am. So don't just say yes because of the three letters after my name in this organization. We need people contributing their unique perspectives. We need leaders to actively listen and
Right.
encourage open dialogue, that transparency that we referred to in the AI products. They need to role model as human beings as well. And then there's a space where they feel valued, not just as workers actually, but as people with diverse ideas. That's going to be really important as AI. I'm going to make a word up here, vanillafies. So as
Right.
makes vanilla everything that we're consuming. We're all going to end up saying the same thing here if we don't have people who can disrupt and make us think differently. So Satya Nadella refers to empathy as the most critical leadership skill. He
Yeah.
did do in 2024. I would agree with that and maybe twist it slightly into compassion, because empathy is just the feeling for the other person, but compassion is actually doing something about it.
Yeah.
You mentioned the injury to my leg, and we talked about how adversity can drive people. We need to be there as leaders to help employees encounter setbacks
Yeah.
and help employees when they encounter setbacks. So if you move back to this utopian principle, things like innovation, that thrives in an environment where you do all of these things, where people feel secure in their jobs, where they can experiment, they can learn without judgment. So that's how I see the humanification of digital learning and digital consumption, helping leaders to cultivate an environment where people can grow without the fear of being undermined, encourage experimentation, value human connection, drive coaching and mentoring.
Right.
And I think it's why is that important? Because this generation and I'm very aware that I'm speaking for this generation, this new generation, as a 50-year-old man. So I might be absolutely wrong here. But my experience of working closely with this generation and lecturing at institutions where you get to meet a lot of them is that they actually are craving context.
Yeah.
They were born into a world where the smartphone existed, graduates.
Yeah.
So none of this is new and revolutionary for them. That's just normal.
Yeah.
They find it easier, the data shows, to switch off from the consumption of mobile phones than people my age do. So our age will sit down, even with partners or family, and all of us on our phones, do dual devicing whilst watching TV. This
Yeah.
generation actively wants to take time away from that. So it's the opposite of what people think. And they
Yeah.
crave human experiences. They want to get together. If you want a data point as to how, where's the evidence to show that? Look at the price of tickets for live events.
Yeah, totally. Yes.
People
So
are
we
more
have
than happy.
Coldplay visiting India now, and Ed Sheeran is in Bangalore in India, and we can see
Right,
the ticket prices going through the roof.
there you go. I mean, exchange rate wise, I don't know, but I could have seen the equivalent of Ed Sheeran probably for $25, £25, 20 years ago.
Right.
Absolutely no chance doing that
Yeah.
these days. So the live experience is classed as a premium value product,
Yeah.
and people will pay for it. So yeah, it's a capitalist planet, to all intents and purposes. But these are trends driven by cultural development.
Right.
So human experiences are still massively valuable. People want to get together. They want to share experiences. They might the counter argument to that, and again the paradox with this is the most popular post that I've ever posted on social was a picture of thousands of people lining the Champs-Élysées in France on New Year's Eve, and you could not see one person without a mobile phone. So
Right.
everybody was filming the same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Like it sort of looked like when you saw the image, you think this is madness,
Yeah.
you know? So they might want the live experiences to record it, but they still want the live experiences. So you want the combination of I'm going to live stream that concert because I can't get to it, but you also are excited if you've got a ticket to those live events. So relate that back to learning, and it all suddenly makes sense.
Right. So it's a phygital world we live in, physical merging seamlessly with the digital. I love that.
Yeah.
And I want to get to the learning culture aspect that you spoke about. You spoke about that as a very important thing. It's that fabric on which everything is mounted. So with your global perspective, right? So you worked with companies and governments across different countries and regions. What nuances are you seeing with respect to learning culture across countries or even sectors for that matter? Is there a variation you see, and what sort of drives that?
Um, Globally, we're still seeing that every single country I mean, the LPI operates in over 80 countries.
Okay.
So you can see clear evidence of general preferences still, but it is changing. However, convenience is still driving most of the decisions around what kind of learning experiences should we build.
Yeah.
There are stereotypes that in the GCC, classroom-based training is the number one preferred method, but I think it's a stereotype for a reason. Actually, that there is some evidence to suggest that that's true. But the idea that people in the GCC are not consuming digital content to develop themselves is laughable. Of course they are. So
Mm.
there are historical global preferences, but global access to high-speed internet capabilities has meant that you've got this kind of democratization of learning
Yeah.
experiences anyway. So that wasn't always the case. But there are amazing organizations. I can't remember the name now, but I'll maybe try and pop you something in chat so you can make the reference. But we work with an unbelievable organization in Africa that was working on this to try and drive, internet access for learning experiences in
Yeah.
organizations. And Rainbow Consulting was one of the consulting companies. I will name drop them, that did an unbelievable job. Margaret Jackson is the CEO of that company. in getting this to happen. So it's a global economy. There's a lot of outsourcing happening, not always for moral reasons. Cheap workforce labor in certain countries is not driving effective learning experiences, because it's actually the opposite that people who own these companies want. So they don't want people developing and wanting to get out of there. They see them as an asset to create whatever they need to create. So you've got these kind of dichotomies philosophically of high-speed internet makes it easier than ever before for people to access learning experiences, but then you've got a kind of command and control culture in some companies stopping
Right.
people from learning. I think you've got the academic sector and the private sector now embracing globally accessible education programs. So I think I'm right in saying that Harvard was the first to do that with an engineering program, and they saw higher pass rates, higher engagement with a global program. So the idea that anybody in any part of the world could go to Harvard, not something that I expected to see before I was 25, and now it's actually happening. And you have a challenge that comes with that. So when you're saying what regional differences have we seen, the challenges are the same of managing remote workforces.
Right.
So post-pandemic, there's a exponential growth in remote workers. So trying to still permit to provoke and permeate the culture that you have at work with diversity and equality is really, again, one of the sort of perennial challenges for CEOs and CLOs now. So how do we make it that everybody's got access, but how do we control, in inverted commas, what people are doing so that that adds value to the business? I hope that makes sense. So unprecedented remote workers, globally accessible education programs, that's great. Convenience efficacy paradox, those learning experiences might not be good enough to sustainably engage people, means that actually everything is becoming pretty similar around the world. People are discovering the same things. We partner with a company called Informer in the Middle East, and there are elements there, some organizations there that aren't looking at rapid digital content yet and infusing generative AI. But when they are made aware of these things, then very quickly they want to adopt it. So there's less global disparity in the learning experiences than there was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah, so that's in a way the democratizing impact of AI and some of these technologies. It's available for everybody. So we start to see fewer regional differences, broad patterns still unfold in different places. And of course, there are elements of culture that will be different, like in an organization that has command and control way things get done, versus in an agile, self-directed organization, things may be very different. So those are nuances to watch out for.
Yeah.
So there's been a wonderful conversation, and that brings me to my last question. Again, zeroing in on learning. What's that one new thing you've learned or tried in the last year? In 2024, did you have a learning theme? Is there anything new you've learned and you're proud of?
Obviously, the use of AI, every day something new happens within there. And on a very basic level, I think if you haven't tried this, Google Notebook Mindset, I think it is, if you just search that, you can put pieces of research that, let's say your organization produced a report on the state of learning globally, right? And it's a 10,000 word document. You can put that document into Google Notebook Mindset, and it will create a 15-minute podcast for you, which
Right.
sounds like two real people talking to each other about the data within that. That I found really exciting because it's another form of media based on the content that's already produced, until a couple of weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when they updated it. And this is what I mean about like the rapidity of development. It's unbelievable. They now have an opportunity on there, or they've introduced something into the software where you can be listening to the podcast that you've created in seconds based on the report that you put in there, and you can actually interact with it.
Right.
So let's say, Rajiv and Sarah are talking about the LPI's learning survey. Fake people talking about it, but it
Yeah.
sounds very realistic. I'm listening, and then I can press the button, and they will say, "Oh, Ed's got a question. Ed, what's your question?" And all of a sudden, it
Yeah.
can feel live, and they will answer my
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
So it's hard to keep up, and it can create a lot of psychological issues at the moment with people where they feel, am I not up to date? Am I not keeping up with this? Am I going to be
Right.
out of a job because I don't know everything? And I think I think there's fear of missing out, but the fear of, if I don't keep up with this, then I'm going to be defunct as a
Yeah.
human being.
Yeah.
Let's remember our principles here. I mean, something comes out every single second at the moment. We can't keep up with everything, and it's exhausting.
Yeah.
Just stick to the principles if you're a learning professional of what is it I'm doing to drive the organization forward and individuals. And then sleep well, rest easy. You can use tech.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ed, for this lovely chat. I hope you ace your paddle this year, and good luck to you on that one. And the insights and the experiences you've shared in this discussion were just mind-blowing, very nuanced, very in-depth and detail. Obviously, the research and the conversations you've had with leaders around the world clearly shows the quality of insights that you brought to our conversation here. Really grateful for this experience we've had together here. And I'm sure our viewers and listeners will find great value and learning from this episode. Thanks to all our viewers and listeners for tuning in to the Learning Curve. We shall be back with the next episode with another great personality and insights on making organizations, leaders, and the workplace ready for the future. Until next time, take care and goodbye.